You know that feeling when someone tells you their problems, and suddenly it's like their pain becomes yours. You walk into a room and immediately sense the tension, the unspoken anger, the hidden sadness, and you can't just ignore it. You absorb it. You carry it home with you. You lie awake at night, thinking about other people's suffering while your own life falls apart. And everyone tells you the same thing: you're too sensitive, you need boundaries, you need to protect your energy. So you try. God, you try so hard. You read the books, you do the meditations, you visualize white light around yourself, you repeat affirmations about being protected. But nothing really changes, does it? You still feel everything. You still take on everyone's pain. You still sacrifice yourself trying to heal people who don't even ask for your help. And then you start to wonder if maybe there's something fundamentally broken in you. If maybe you're just destined to be drained and exhausted for the rest of your life. But what if I told you that everything you've been taught about being an empath and about healing is actually keeping you trapped? What if the real transformation isn't about protecting yourself from feeling, but about something completely different, something that most people are terrified to face? There's a strange kind of suffering that belongs specifically to people who feel too much. It's not the dramatic suffering of a single traumatic event. It's the slow erosion that happens when you spend years and years making yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. You walk into your friend's crisis and you instinctively know exactly what to say, exactly how to hold space, exactly how to make them feel seen. And for a moment, you feel purposeful. You feel needed. You feel like maybe this is why you're here, to be the one who understands, the one who cares, the one who saves. But then you go home and you're completely empty. Not just tired, empty. Like someone reached inside you and scooped out everything that made you feel alive. And you tell yourself this is just what being an empath means. You tell yourself this is your gift, even though it feels more like a curse. You try to set boundaries, but every time you do, the guilt crashes over you like a wave. What if they really need you? What if you're the only one who understands? What if saying no makes you selfish, cold, not a real empath anymore? So you keep giving, you keep absorbing, you keep trying to heal everyone around you while you slowly disappear. And the cruelest part is that you've been taught to see this as noble, as spiritual, as evidence of your elevated consciousness. You've been told that empaths are special, that you're more evolved, more connected, more aware. But Michel Foucault would look at this narrative and see something else entirely. He would see a perfect example of what he called a technology of the self, a set of practices and beliefs that don't liberate you, but actually produce you as a certain kind of subject. A subject who is always available, always porous, always responsible for other people's emotional states. A subject who has learned to police their own boundaries in the name of sensitivity, who has internalized a form of discipline so complete that you don't even need anyone else to tell you to sacrifice yourself anymore. You do it automatically. Think about how you learned to be an empath. Maybe you grew up in a household where you had to read the room to stay safe, where you became an expert in detecting your parents' mood before they even walked through the door. Maybe you learned that your value came from being the one who could smooth things over, who could absorb the tension, who could make everyone else comfortable. And over time, this survival mechanism became your identity. It became the story you tell about yourself. I'm an empath. I feel everything. I can't help it. But Foucault would ask you to notice something crucial here. This identity, this way of being that feels so natural and so true, it's not actually who you essentially are. It's who you learned to become in response to specific power relations. Your sensitivity isn't a mystical gift from the universe. It's a highly refined skill you developed, because at some point in your life, your survival or your sense of worth depended on being able to feel and manage other people's emotions. And here's where it gets really uncomfortable. The spiritual language around being an empath, all the talk about being a light worker, about having a mission to heal others, about your sensitivity being a higher vibration. This language doesn't free you from this pattern. It sanctifies it. It takes a survival mechanism born from pain and repackages it as a sacred calling. And now you're not just stuck in the pattern, you're stuck in the pattern while believing that escaping it would mean betraying your true self, your purpose, your gifts. You're imprisoned by the very identity you thought was your liberation. So what does it actually mean to heal as an empath? And this is where we have to be brutally honest, because the real healing is not what the spiritual marketplace is selling you. It's not about better boundaries, as if you just need a stronger fence around yourself. It's not about protection techniques, as if you're constantly under siege and need more armor. It's not about learning to transmute energy or raise your vibration or any of the other metaphysical strategies that ultimately keep you in the same paradigm. The real healing, the kind that Foucault's work points us toward, is about recognizing that the empath identity itself is a construction. And I know how threatening that sounds. I know that for many people, being an empath isn't just something they do, it's who they are. It's the lens through which they understand their entire life story. But stay with me here, because this recognition isn't about denying your sensitivity or your capacity to feel deeply. It's about understanding that you have been practicing a very specific way of relating to yourself and others, and that this practice has been shaped by power, by history, by the systems you grew up in. You've been trained, not by some evil conspiracy, but by the subtle and pervasive forces of how families work, how emotional labor gets distributed, how care gets gendered and racialized and classed. And recognizing this opens up a possibility that the protective boundary approach never can. It opens up the possibility of practicing yourself differently, of experimenting with ways of being sensitive that don't require you to be consumed, of feeling deeply without making other people's feelings your responsibility, of caring without disappearing. Here's what this actually looks like, and it's uncomfortable because it requires you to give up something you might have been clinging to. It requires you to give up the identity of being the one who saves, the one who understands, the one who holds space. Because that identity, as painful as it is, also gives you something. It gives you purpose. It gives you a sense of being special. It gives you a way to avoid looking at your own pain because you're always busy attending to everyone else's. The healed empath, if we can even use that phrase, doesn't become someone who feels less. They become someone who stops performing empathy as a way to secure their value. They become someone who can feel someone else's pain without making it their project. They can witness suffering without rushing in to fix it, without taking responsibility for it, without making it about their own need to be needed. And this is radically different from the spiritual bypassing version of detachment, where you try to rise above feelings or convince yourself that everyone is on their own journey, and you shouldn't interfere. This is about recognizing that your compulsive helping, your inability to tolerate other people's discomfort, your need to absorb and process everyone's emotions, these aren't signs of how much you care. They're signs of how you've learned to manage your own anxiety, your own fear of not being enough, your own terror of being ordinary and unspecial. Before we go deeper, I need to pause and ask you something, and I really want you to be honest, even if it's just with yourself. Have you ever felt this? Have you ever recognized yourself in what I'm describing? Because I know that when you're living this pattern, you feel completely alone with it. You look around and everyone else seems to have healthy boundaries. Everyone else seems to know how to care without disappearing. And you think, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do what seems so easy for everyone else? But here's the truth, you're not alone. There are thousands of people watching this video right now who are feeling exactly what you're feeling. And you know what helps more than any theory I could share? It's knowing that other people understand. It's knowing that this struggle is real and shared. So go down to the comments right now and just write this, write, I'm living this pattern right now. You don't have to explain anything if you don't want to. You don't have to tell your whole story. Just that one sentence is enough. Because when you write that, you're not just venting, you're telling another person who's going to read your comment, you're not alone either. And that might be exactly what someone needed to hear today. So take a second, go comment, and then come back. Wait. There was a woman I spoke with once who had spent her entire adult life being what everyone called the strong friend, the one who always had time to listen, who always knew what to say, who could hold space for anyone's breakdown at 3 in the morning. She worked as a therapist, which made perfect sense, and she was good at it, really good. Her clients loved her. Her friends depended on her. Her family called her whenever there was a crisis, and she was dying inside. Not dramatically, just slowly fading, like a photograph left in the sun. She came to me exhausted, depleted, resentful, and then guilty about being resentful, because isn't this what being a good person means? Isn't this what having empathy means? She had tried everything. She had set boundaries, but they never stuck. She had taken time off, but she just spent it worrying about everyone she wasn't helping. She had gone to therapy herself, but even there she found herself managing her therapist's feelings, making sure she wasn't too much, too needy, too demanding. And then one day something shifted. Not because she learned a new technique or read a new book. It shifted because she asked herself a question she had never really asked before. Why do I need to be needed? Not why am I empathetic, but why do I need it? Why does the thought of someone else solving their own problems, of someone else being okay without me, why does that terrify me? And when she sat with that question, really sat with it, she realized something that broke her open. She realized that her entire sense of self was built on being indispensable, that somewhere deep down, she believed that if she wasn't the one saving people, she had no value. That her empathy wasn't really about caring for others as much as it was about securing her own sense of being worthy of existence. And this realization didn't make her less caring, it made her care differently. She started to notice when she was rushing in to help, not because help was needed, but because she needed to help. She started to catch herself absorbing other people's anxiety, not because she was too sensitive, but because carrying their anxiety was easier than facing her own. She started to experiment with something radical, with letting people struggle, with trusting that they could handle their own lives, with admitting that she didn't actually know what was best for everyone else. And slowly, over months and years, she became someone different, not someone who felt less, but someone who had stopped collapsing herself into other people's experiences, someone who could be present without being consumed, someone who had learned, finally, that her worth didn't depend on being everyone's emotional savior. So if you're recognizing yourself in all of this, if you're starting to see how the empath identity might be both describing something real about you and trapping you in a particular way of being, what do you actually do? And I want to be clear, here I'm not going to give you a 5-step program or a simple fix, because that would just be replacing one technology of the self with another. But I can point you toward a different kind of practice, what Foucault might call a practice of freedom. Start by noticing when you're performing empathy versus when you're actually feeling. Notice when you sense someone's distress and your immediate reaction is to make it stop, not for their sake, but because you can't tolerate it. Notice when you're more comfortable talking about other people's problems than your own. Notice when you say yes, when everything in you wants to say no, and notice what you're afraid will happen if you don't say yes. And here's the key, don't try to change these patterns yet. Don't judge them, don't make them wrong. Just notice them. Watch yourself doing them with curiosity instead of criticism. Because the trap of the empath identity is that it's so totalizing, so all-encompassing, that you can't see it while you're in it. You need some distance. You need to be able to observe yourself practicing being an empath the same way you might observe yourself practicing a sport or a musical instrument. It's something you do, not something you are. And once you have that distance, even just a little bit, you can start to experiment. What happens if you don't immediately respond to that friend's text about their relationship drama? What happens if you let someone sit with their uncomfortable feelings instead of trying to make them feel better? What happens if you say, I don't know, I can't fix this for you, instead of scrambling to find the perfect solution? And yes, it will be uncomfortable. Yes, people might be confused or even hurt. Yes, you might feel selfish and guilty and wrong. But notice those feelings too. Notice how much of your identity is invested in being the person who never lets anyone down. Notice how that's a prison you've built for yourself out of good intentions. The transformation of a healed empath is not a transformation into someone who has mastered boundaries and can now help people without getting drained. That's still the same paradigm, just with better management. The real transformation is into someone who has stopped making other people's emotional states their responsibility at all. Someone who can care deeply and still know where they end and someone else begins. Someone who has given up the secret thrill of being indispensable and learned to tolerate being ordinary. And ordinary here doesn't mean mediocre or uncaring. It means human. It means having your own life, your own needs, your own limits. It means trusting that other people are capable of handling their own struggles. It means understanding that you actually can't heal anyone else anyway, that all healing is ultimately something people do for themselves, and that your job is not to save the world, but to stop abandoning yourself in the name of caring for others. Foucault spent his life studying how we become subjects, how we come to think of ourselves in certain ways that then limit how we can exist. And he was always interested in the possibility of practicing ourselves differently, of refusing the identities that have been handed to us, even the ones that seem positive and empowering, because every identity is also a limit. Every way of being a self is also a way of not being something else. And the empath identity, as comforting as it might be, as much as it might explain your pain and give you a community and make you feel special, is also keeping you from becoming who you might be if you weren't so busy being sensitive to everyone else. So what does a healed empath become? They become someone who has stopped being an empath as an identity and started being a person who sometimes feels deeply, who sometimes cares, who sometimes helps, and who sometimes doesn't. They become someone who has learned that their value doesn't depend on their usefulness. They become someone who can tolerate being misunderstood, being called selfish, being told they've changed, because they have changed. They've stopped performing a version of themselves that keeps everyone else comfortable while they slowly die inside. If you've made it this far in this video, I know you're not just looking for information. You're looking for permission. Permission to stop being who everyone needs you to be. Permission to start existing for yourself. And I want you to know that this channel is here for people exactly like you, people who are done with the spiritual platitudes, who want to think deeply about how we become who we are and how we might become someone else. Every week I create content that explores these questions through philosophy and real human experience. If you want to continue this journey of unbecoming and re-becoming, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Not because I need numbers, but because you deserve to have a space where you can question everything, even the identities that feel most sacred. And if this video touched something real in you, leave a like so more people who need to hear this can find it. You don't have to carry everyone's pain anymore. And here's what I need you to understand as we close this out. The uncomfortable truth about what a healed empath becomes is that they become unrecognizable to the people who needed them to stay small. They become disappointing to the people who depended on their endless availability. They become threatening to the systems that relied on their self-sacrifice. And that's how you know the healing is real. Not because you feel peaceful and balanced and everyone approves of your boundaries, but because you've stopped needing approval at all. Because you've discovered that who you are when you're not busy being an empath is actually more interesting, more alive, more yours than the performance ever was. You've spent so long thinking your sensitivity was your curse and trying to turn it into your gift. But maybe it was never either. Maybe it was just a skill you learned, a strategy you developed, a way of surviving that outlived its usefulness. And maybe the real gift isn't learning to protect yourself from feeling everything. Maybe it's learning that you never had to carry everything in the first place, that other people's pain is not your pain, that their journey is not your responsibility, that your existence doesn't need to be justified by how much you help or heal or hold space. You're allowed to just be here feeling what you feel, living your own life, letting other people live theirs. That's the uncomfortable truth. That's the liberation that no one prepared you for. That's what happens when you stop being an empath and start being free.